but this is the President of the United States speaking yesterday on Easter. This is what he said: "Open the effing straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah." And then this morning, the President of the United States said, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." This is in advance of President Trump's deadline to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Congressman Richard Neal of Western Massachusetts is ranking Democrat on the House Ways and Means Committee. What's your reaction as a guy a little younger than me who is hearing the President of the United States talk like that to a foreign country?
I'm stunned. And I think that there are boundaries to good taste. We keep seeing them violated now almost every day. And oftentimes the reaction to those words is as bad as what the president says, where people of our generation, Chris, and I could say this, I think, with confidence, we were pretty careful about what we used for word selection in public. And oftentimes, as you know, we were trying to make an argument to convince people of the merit of the position that we were offering. But we refrained from, I think, bad word choice. And I worry now, no matter where we are, I hear the epithets that are being hurled across the aisle. And I think that oftentimes it descends into part of the chaos that we're all witnessing.
You know, when you live in Washington, as you do, when you go to work there in the U.S. Capitol, you probably go down to visit the Lincoln Memorial occasionally, and you look up on the wall and you read the second inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln, who said at the end of the Civil War, he said, "You know, we both pray to the same God, but we have different histories with slavery." But he tried to understand that in biblical sense. Here we have Pete Hegseth this week appealing to Jesus Christ, not to providence, but to a particular religion, our religion, appealing to Christianity in his battle with Islam. The Pope saying God rejects the language of the warrior, and then Trump makes fun of Islam in that comment about praise be to Allah. He's insulting Islamic people in our country and around the world. It just seems, is this a battle of religion? Is this what it's come down to?
One thing that the two of us have in common, and I always recommend to my staff, they always should read Jack Kennedy's speech to the Greater Houston Ministerial Council. Yeah. It's a remarkable moment. And in that instance, as we both would recall, the issue that Kennedy hoped would subside and go away was his Catholicism. And he finally looks at the polling data and says, I have no choice. I have to confront the issue head on. And he goes to Houston, makes the argument in very elegant words. He gets a standing ovation. And he makes that very essential point about the whole notion in America of unity without uniformity. And I watch the divisive rhetoric that comes from this White House. I watch and listen to Hegseth's commentary on who qualifies as an American based upon their religious beliefs. And it's entirely contrary to what even Jefferson envisioned in the Declaration of Independence, and which we constitutionally made sure of with Madison's work as well. And I think it's very worrisome. I think that there's been this growing notion in America of using charged religious rhetoric, not understanding that they embraced a system of a representative democracy that would not be a theocracy. And Jefferson's letter to that Baptist minister in Connecticut, as you recall, set the tone.
Oh, I don't get it. I mean, Kennedy, as you said down at Houston in 1960, said, "I'm the Democratic candidate for president who happens to be Catholic. I am not the Catholic candidate for president." He really discerned the difference between our political loyalty and our religious faith, and separate them out. Let me ask you about maybe a closer to home issue with your constituents up there. I was just looking out the window here on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, and I looked at the price of gas at an Exxon station. $6 for premium for Supreme, $5 for regular, $5 and $6 to fill your car. Say you got a 20-gallon tank, maybe a Jeep or something like that, any bigger tank even. You fill the tank, it's $120. I mean, that is an astounding number
Well,
to me.
if you're a minimum wage employee, that means that you have to work 1 day a week just to fill your gas tank to get back and forth to work. And I think that what we're witnessing here is this climb, which, by the way, was predicted that it would take place because of the Strait of Hormuz. And one of the things that the president seems to ignore is the fact that oil is treated as an international commodity in markets. And this notion, again, that at the Strait of Hormuz, that because America is energy independent right now, that it would not affect other world prices and would not eventually bleed into the American system, was a miscalculation on his part. And I think the other thing that he does, he dismisses it as a short-term occurrence. It is not going to be a short-term occurrence.
Explain that to me, because I think I understand it, but gas is fungible. If prices of gas around the world go up because of a grab on the Strait of Hormuz, well, all gas prices go up because it's all one big pile of gas.
Coupled with the fact that, as I noted, it's internationally traded. That's the essential consideration, and it's a remarkable, but it's highlighted by the problem we have in New England. We don't have any refineries, so we pay a disproportionately high price as it is in New England. But the fact that we are usually using LNG in Everett, Massachusetts, is a pretty wild consideration as it relates to international gas prices.
You know, when I worked for Speaker O'Neill, I have to tell you, I learned about the value of oil in your people in Western Mass. Are people using, what do they use for heating in the winter?
Well, we're overwhelmingly dependent still on oil. There's no doubt about it. There's an abundance of gas, but if you look at New England, particularly in a place like Maine, they are still very much dependent upon oil and those old systems. And it's pronounced, Chris, in a place like Holyoke, where you would have many old apartment blocks.
Right.
And you might have a single mom who, I think we need to pay more attention to that economic argument that she has. So when she runs out of her fuel allocation in March, she's heating the flat by opening the oven door at a time when America is, in fact, energy independent. And I think, that, by the way, if I can nicely, that's the Democratic Party we grew up in. We would have cared about
I agree.
that.
Well, I took a girl from Chicopee to the BC game in 1966 at Holy Cross. Anyway, we won that game.
You're not complaining about gasoline prices, are you, to come out and drive out here?
Well, we have better things to talk about, like winning football games. Let me ask you about affordability and I don't know. It seems like they worry about the 26 elections with this war going on. It's like we got bigger worries than that. I keep thinking, okay, Hakeem Jeffries could be the next speaker, and Catherine Clark could be the whip, but there's probably bigger issues. I worry about us losing our ability as the reserve currency.
Yep.
We're running Trump wants $200 billion more for the war. $200 billion. I mean, Democrats used to be a little looser on spending than Republicans, but I think the Republicans have grabbed that championship away from us. I think they're the big spenders now.
So
I wonder about tariffs.
Let me confirm exactly what you've said with facts. So the day that Bill Clinton left the presidency, America was staring at trillions of dollars of surplus. We had balanced the budget 4 successive times, and George Bush Jr. cut taxes in 2001 by $1.3 trillion, came back again in 2003 by another trillion. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, 1 million new veterans, and the deregulation of Wall Street, which we all had to pay for. And then if you go to 2017, Republicans borrowed the money for the 2017 tax cuts, $2.3 trillion more. And then the president's big bill, which is hardly beautiful, they added almost $4 trillion more of debt. And the irony of it is, it's borrowed money to pay for tax cuts. That's a fact.
And where are we borrowing, Mr. Chairman? I hope you're chairman soon. But where do we borrow the money? We always say taxpayers because that's a good thing to argue politically, but we're really borrowing the money. So where are we borrowing money? Are we borrowing it from China? Where do we borrow our debt from?
We borrow the money from China. We borrow the money in international markets. Japan is a country that contributes to that debt. or the borrowing cost for us. We borrow them in international markets. And it's, look, you mentioned the Federal Reserve and you mentioned the dollar as the international denomination. What's significant about that is that the world honors that dollar because they know we're going to pay our debt.
Yeah.
That's what makes it remarkable as the reserve currency for the world.
Can we keep doing it if we borrow 200 billion more?
Well, you're at 39 trillion now. And the other part of it, I think, which is ironic, but noteworthy, and that is Republicans are always in favor of balancing the budget when there's a Democratic president. I mean, it's no small consideration.
I agree with you.
It's pretty wild. I mean, and they
how come the MAGA guys out there, and I've got some in my family who are in that world, I got to tell you, cousins, I mean, I got working class members of my family who are MAGA. I got to tell you, it's a reality. And they don't worry about the debt. They're not worried about Trump. They say anything he wants. This guy's, he's God practically.
Well, I used a statistic, and I'm going to bring up a name that you'd be familiar with. When Terry O'Sullivan was running the Laborers International, pretty darn good guy. He said at one point, we were talking about the presidential election, and he said that 62% of the laborers in Ohio were going to vote for Trump.
I believe it.
That's a pretty wild number.
It's a red state now.
It's a red state. And Obama won it twice. Hillary lost it, Biden lost it, Kamala Harris lost it by 12. And you look at Florida now, you have to worry about that as well. Kamala Harris lost it by 14. Biden won it. Biden lost it by 2. Obama won it twice by 2. Arithmetic needs to be part of our considerations and our calculations going forward.
I agree. And I think Pennsylvania will win back 3 seats this year. I think in Scranton and in the Lehigh Valley and in Harrisburg. I don't think Fitzgerald or Fitzpatrick will lose, but I don't know. And I think I'm worried about the 3. But I think I'm just going to bring up something that's painful perhaps to Democrats like you. And I got to say, and me, why does Ken Martin, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, not release the autopsy on why Trump got reelected? It's one thing to understand how Trump won in 2016. It is hard and difficult to accept that he was accepted again by the American people in a popular vote in 2024. And I want the Democrats to understand why he did that. What's your understanding of why he won a second presidential election by popular vote in 2024?
Well, I think part of it was that the very people that I described a moment ago in Ohio, they now see us as being less interested in the issues that affect their lives. And I think defund the police was a terrible mistake from our side. And I think that we have always identified with labor union types. Well, why is it that labor union types no longer identify with us?
I do well with here, I'll give you one. I'll give you back one to think about. I watch Meet the Press every week, and I also turn on Face the Nation to find out what they're doing. On Sunday morning, I go to church, but I do that. I want to know what Face the Nation is going to tell me to make the news for the week and what Face the Nation. You never, ever, ever see a labor leader on any of those programs. How come labor doesn't have a big voice? When I was growing up politically, George Meany would come to our budget committee with Senator Muskie, and I got to tell you, the Republicans on the committee lit his cigars.
Yes.
I mean, everybody understood the power of labor. I know labor's not as strong as it was, but how come they're not on television? How come they're not talking to the American people every week about the economy?
We did for them recently, probably as Jimmy Hoffa has described it and Terry O'Sullivan have described it, one of the most important things that's happened to labor in 50 years, and that was the Butch-Lewis Act.
Yeah.
The Butch-Lewis Act restored their pensions. And I made that argument in Nancy Pelosi's office, the two of us, with every labor leader. When I said to the speaker, I am going to put the Butch-Lewis Act into the rescue package. And the labor leaders, they were all there. You would know them all on a first-name basis. Yeah. And they were so grateful. And so I went to the White House with the speaker. We were standing outside to see Joe Biden. And I said to Nancy, I said, Speaker, I'm going to tell the president now I'm putting the Butch-Lewis Act in the rescue package. And she said, go for it. So we walked in, sat down with Joe Biden. And I said, Mr. President, I'm going to put the Butch-Lewis Act in. And generally that's when people run over to the president and say, we'll take it into consideration. And Biden says to us, and I'm going to support you. That means all those pensions were restored that had been compromised. And the position of many people on the Republican side in particular was pretty simple. We're going to cut back on those pension guarantees. Those are people that played by the rules their entire lives. They went to work, they served in the military, they did exactly what America asked of them. And then we're telling them at 70 years old that we're going to cut their pensions in half. Joe Biden was a great friend of labor. When you look at what he got done during those years for organized labor, it's quite extraordinary. And we need to do a better job of reminding our friends in labor what this meant to the Teamsters, what this meant to the laborers, what this meant to musicians in New York City who were part of these affiliates.
Yeah.
I feel I couldn't agree more with you when you say that they need to be on those Sunday talk shows.
Yeah.
Talking about
it's not hard. You call up
the
producers of those shows. You say, I'm here representing X million number of laborers or workers. I'm with SAG or I'm with some of the Teamsters or whatever. I want to get on television. Put me on. They ought to be a little more affirmative, and don't like the old people either. I like people young enough to get on television. I'm sorry. You got to do that too. Let me ask you about James Naismith, who invented basketball. They've been having some fun with the March Madness with him. They got a guy playing him. What do you think he would have made of this player who is 7'3" from Spain named Ade Mara? What did you make of him last night? This he can dunk standing on his feet.
It's remarkable. And, the Hall of Fame is here. As a matter of fact, that's the last time I think you and I talked together. You were here for an event at the Hall of Fame, and it's pretty spectacular here in Springfield. And the Hall of Fame, by the way, the game was invented at Springfield College.
I know.
And so watching that game last night, you're reminded of something else, and it's raw athleticism. These guys at 6'9", 6'10", they can even dribble. It's astounding to me. I mean, Julius Erving and Elgin Baylor, I always thought, created the standing in the air while doing everything.
Well, being able to do a dunk from midcourt, I mean, that's amazing. I don't know how you fly that far, but Dr. J could fly that far.
Yeah. Well, he could dribble too.
Yeah.
Nice guy.
Well, I always wondered about the Europeans able to play basketball at our level. The Illinois team, or rather, the Michigan State team was all people from Eastern Europe. And I got, oh my God, they must play a tough game over there. But I loved it. I love March Madness. I rooted for UConn. I always vote for the Northeast team. I root for them. I like Mullins going that 35 shooter against Duke. I thought that was great stuff.
What a shot.
Well, he'll be remembered forever as the guy that got him into the final playoffs. And good for him. I hope he gets into the pros. We'll see if he makes it there. But he's only a freshman. I don't know. What are you going to talk about it then? Anyway, I loved to coach Hurley. It was great. Great show. Who'd you root for last night?
UConn.
Me too. With always the Northeastern team. When I run out of Catholic schools, I go to the Northeast. Anyway, maybe Villanova will come back. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. We have a dangerous world out there. Thank you so much, Congressman, very much for joining us from Western Mass, probably the future chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for joining us.
All the best, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're going to have Mark Warner on in a minute. He's ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I've got so many questions for him. And they're going to start with what the president's been saying in the last 24 hours. I wonder about the condition. Talk about intel. What's the condition of the president? And I'm not squirrely about this. I don't know what his condition is. He's obviously overweight. Obviously, he doesn't look healthy exactly. But what's the mental condition of our president in the way he's talking about Islam, or the way he's letting his Secretary of Defense talk about religion in this country and in the country over there, and what he said mocking Islam in a country we're battling right now? Why do you escalate the religious nature of our differences by attacking the other country's most profound religion? And we've learned, I can tell you, I lived through the 1979-1980 hostage crisis, and I worry about a hostage crisis emerging again. If one of our pilots and one of our crewmen is shot down over Iran, do you think that they're going to be respectful of their rights under the Geneva Convention? Do we expect them to treat prisoners with care? Give me a break. The way we're conditioning this situation is that all hell's breaking loose, and especially in the lives of our hostages, should they be taken. And we're going to have Mark Warner on. After that, we're going to have Ian Applebaum on to talk about the situation today with the President of the United States, again, Donald Trump, declaring his endorsement of Viktor Orban. Oh, thank you. Mark Warner, Senator Warner, it's so great to have you on. Your ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I got to ask you the question, what do you make of the president's words on Easter Sunday morning and today about wiping out a civilization in Iran, a civilization that will never be able to recover? What do you make of presidents who talk like that?
I think somebody that is, to say the least, the complete opposite of every president we've ever had before, including Trump's first term. Is this him completely unhinged? Is this, his supporters will say this is just his negotiating style. But you use this kind of language, and regardless of the outcome, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. If the people of the world hear an American president say we're going to destroy a civilization, Chris, we've always been kind of, with all our flaws, we've still been viewed as generally the good guys. This is the kind of shit you'd hear out of Vladimir Putin or out of, frankly, the former Iranian leadership who would have said death to America. That kind of tit for tat kind of language is sure as heck not the way we'd expect presidents to act or talk.
Well, I think you're so right, Senator, about the way that the Middle East does. They deal in rumor mongering. They pick up the latest rumor. They talk about God as if they possess God, as if their religion is profoundly important to the expense of ours. Death to America, I always thought that was the sound of a crazy person. Death to Israel, that's another crazy line. They're not going to bring death to Israel by saying it, and they're not going to bring death to the United States by saying it. But Trump acts like, you effing bastards, you crazy bastards, death to Islam. Like it's like inciting the most religious person in Iran, who probably still vaguely likes the old Ayatollah, to go back to that, to go back to the worst kind of America hating.
Yeah. And let's face it, 47 years this regime was awful. If the president if Trump had tried to start this when the Iranian people were on the streets in early January, at least there was a nexus. I think it still would have been ill-founded, but he couldn't start it in the middle of January because the aircraft carrier he needed to Ford was off the coast of Venezuela, and he couldn't do it in January when the Iranian people were out in the streets in millions, because even though we don't have much support from the Europeans now, at that point he was threatening Greenland. So I think Trump sees each of these incidents as a standalone negotiation and then doesn't recognize how everything is interrelated, particularly when you're talking about global affairs and when you're talking about the world's leading economic and military power, the United States. And he is willing to gamble with not only its reputation, but frankly, it's been an incredible blessing that we've not lost more troops so far. I mean, and the military has been extraordinary. Getting those 2 pilots out was extraordinary, but they are being stretched to their breaking point, and we are running out of interceptors. I mean, to give you one quick point, Chris, the Ukrainians offered us in December their drone technology, which at less than $5,000 a pop can take down an Iranian $50,000 drone. Instead, we've been using Tomahawk missiles at $2.4 million a pop to take down the Iranian drones, and we're running out.
Yeah.
So that means our bases will be further exposed.
So what are we going to do? We're going to get them back from Poland, or what? Where do we get Tomahawks? Make them? We have to make them.
We've been talking about the defense supply chain for years under D's, R's, regardless. And frankly, that the industrial base has not met the moment. Part of that's the reason is DOD. The part of that is because DOD never gets rid of any of its old systems. They keep adding new with not getting any of the old, as you know. But we are, we're going to take those Tomahawks away that have already been purchased by another European country that's going to go to Ukraine. Frankly, when the Ukrainians near the end of the year was slightly turning the tables a little bit, the Russian losses were really going extraordinarily higher. And now we've got Trump both freeing up Putin's oil, so he's got an extra $10 billion, and by removing the sanctions on Iranian oil, we're literally funding the Iranians for about $14 billion as they try to kill our troops.
You know, I've been reading a lot about George Washington and the crossing of the Delaware in 1776, which is 250 years ago. And what you learn is if you can survive, as Washington did after the crossing of the Delaware and the Battle of Princeton, he kept the morale up. It seems to me that we're fighting an enemy now in Iran, which we've made a new enemy, renewed as an enemy with President Trump. That they're not going to quit. The Brits didn't quit during the Blitz. The Germans didn't quit after Stalingrad for 2 years. The Vietnamese, we should have learned very hard. The bombing of Vietnam surmounted the overall bombing of World War II, and they didn't quit. Why do we think the Iranians are going to quit?
I think if the president had read the intelligence, he would have known that as bad as this regime is, it's got institutional layers. Taking out the top doesn't get rid of it. And the idea that he didn't know that they were going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz or attack Saudi or Kuwait or UAE, that's bullshit. I mean,
really? That was in the kind of daily intelligence report the president gets?
Chris, we all know. You've been doing this for a long time as well. The Iranian regime, awful against us, against Israel, frankly, against Sunni states in the region. But there was a reason why for 47 years, other presidents didn't take this on, because unless you had a full-fledged plan and a full-fledged alliance, you would end up where we are right now, 39 days in, where you're damned if you do and you continue, but you're damned if you don't. And Iran says at the end of the day, well, we've now beat America and Israel, and everybody in the region's got to heed to our call because we will blow up more of the natural gas facilities in Qatar. This is such, I mean, I hope that the audience realizes it's not just gas. It's natural gas in terms of diesel. It's jet fuel, who you can't even buy at certain places and around the world right at this point. It's the fact that fertilizer costs, aluminum costs, helium. I had no idea that most of the helium that's used in our semiconductor chips comes from the Middle East. And you've got most of Asia shut down or starting to shut down 1 day a week because they don't even have oil at any cost.
Let me ask you about it to be positive. If it's possible for a Democrat or any American to be positive now, the MAGA people, I have a brother, one of them, who's just fanatical. And he argues that we have to get rid of their nuclear threat. In what way is the current policy going to lead to us getting rid of the nuclear threat?
I don't see a way, Chris, because there's 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium. They are in canisters that are really volatile. You can't bang them around. It would require us, unless the Iranians gave it to us, to put 10,000 troops guarding the border around the nuclear facility, send in our special operators with the very real threat that the Iranians would then bomb their own facility and try to entomb our troops. I don't know how you take out by force the enriched uranium.
Is it under the rubble or above the rubble?
It's in some of these bunkers where there is some rubble, they have access to some of it and others. And I don't want to go further on that topic.
Yeah.
But there are plans. You know, the president's acknowledged he's got plans to try to take the enriched uranium, but there are, from a military standpoint, you're talking about something that would be extraordinarily difficult. And again, it goes back to the fact that it's been a miracle that we have not had more casualties already.
Are we in a situation where we can go in there for weeks with any kind of safety?
I have not. I try to get almost a daily brief on this, although the administration has been not briefing in any way. Matter of fact, they came up to the Armed Services Committees and they were both asking, why are all these troops being deployed? They got no answer.
50,000 troops. And the question is, are they going to open the strait or are they going for the nuclear material or both?
And
this is as of 8:00 tonight. This would be a mission by Trump's measure. There'd be a mission sometime after at 8:00 tonight to not just take them back to the Stone Age, end their civilization, as he said today, but also to retrieve the reason we went in there, the nuclear material, or open the straits, something we didn't count on being a reality today.
Chris, I've heard no indication that you try to do both those, get the strait open and get the nuclear material out. You're not talking a couple of weeks. You're talking much, much longer. And how many Americans want to send their sons or daughters to another land war in the Middle East?
What do you think Trump's going to say tonight at 8:00 when he has to face his own deadline? It's his deadline. He just came up with a name. It was going to do it Monday night, but there was a basketball game. This is how frivolous our foreign policy is. There's a basketball game last night with everybody watching. So it was on at 9:00 Eastern time last night, and I was rooting for UConn, but that's all right. There was a basketball game. So what? He's talking about announcing a war tonight at 8:00. I mean, who is as frivolous as to say, well, it depends on the basketball schedule? What?
You can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's amen. And it's one of the things, as you know, I've been criticized by you and others a lot of times for trying to be too bipartisan. But boy, I've kind of given, at least for the last year, I've been repeatedly disappointed by, Republican senators who I know love our country, but are afraid to speak the truth. And
well, let's talk Republican for a minute. I grew up in a Republican family. I got to tell you, I was very proud of the fact that in 1952, Henry Cabot Lodge, the senator from Massachusetts, went over to Paris and finally got Eisenhower to agree to run for president. And he got Eisenhower to run for one big reason. He wanted to save NATO, and his opponent would have been Bob Taft from Ohio. And Bob Taft wanted to get rid of NATO, but the supreme commander of NATO, Dwight Eisenhower, said, I'm going to save NATO. In 1956, the British, the French, and the Israelis brought a war against Egypt to try to reclaim the Suez Canal. Eisenhower said, no, he didn't say effing. He said, no way you're going to win this war. It's over. He knocked off the British government of Anthony Eden. He was a great American member and leader of NATO. Now we have a MAGA movement, which I think is on the edge of getting out of NATO. We're not going to have any allies in the world except maybe Viktor Orban or I don't know who, Vladimir Putin. What happened to America? What happened to us with Trump getting reelected? He's going to kill our greatest alliance ever.
Chris, I don't think. Remember, Marco Rubio, along with Tim Kaine, sponsored the bill to say the president can't take America out of NATO without congressional approval. And I think the overwhelming number of Republicans know that and will vote that way. I can tell you in the most Republican parts of my state, when Trump was rallying for Putin against the Ukrainians, I found no support for Putin. I think the American people are smarter than what Donald Trump is proposing. Now, I do think he had a legitimate case that NATO needed to chip in more, but the ability to do that by simply bullying people, it burns relationships. We all know it takes a lot to piss off the Canadians, but we have pissed off the Canadians for the next 2 decades.
We've made Carney into a hero up there. The Prime Minister.
I know Carney. I think he's a really smart guy.
Yeah,
but he, it's going to be a long time before they start buying Kentucky or Virginia bourbon.
Yeah, well, so you think we'll stay in NATO no matter what you think the Republican Party will challenge
I think the Republican Party will not crater on NATO.
Okay, let's ask a question which is bothering me as a journalist for 5 years or so. I thought Trump was in bed with Netanyahu, he is with Netanyahu, but with Putin. And I kept thinking, well, there must be some connection because all of a sudden Russians were showing up at Republican conventions. I said, I've been to a lot of conventions in both parties. I've never seen Russians anywhere, but Russians are everywhere. All these meetings walking in the door. I said, what's got a hold of him? What they got on Trump? And I don't know what it was. It wasn't the story they pushed around the 2 women in the hotel room and all that crap, but there was something there. And now today he's in Hungary. He's in Hungary. And he's endorsing Orban, the dictator of Hungary. He's an ally of Putin. How did we get in bed with Putin again?
Well,
again.
remember, that's
What
J.D.
is
Vance.
going on?
That's not Trump. That's his surrogate, J.D. Vance there. And
no, he went there. No, Trump interrupted Vance's speech today and went on Hungarian television with the people there. Yeah, he did that late this morning. And I go,
listen,
oh my God, he's in bed with Viktor
let's hope
Orban.
all the polls are right in Hungary and Orban gets his butt kicked on Saturday.
Well, why is he doing this? Why is Trump sending J.D. Vance over there?
All of your viewers may not, but we did the biggest investigation into the Russian interference in 2016. It was bipartisan, the whole Intelligence Committee, 5 volumes laid out. We drew a lot of lines that had Trump's weird connections to Russia. We were terribly disappointed that Bob Mueller, who passed away recently, in his investigation didn't pick up any of that. There was clearly, our report was quite clear that Russia helped. Now, I don't think whether Trump fully solicited or not, but there has been a weird connection between Trump and Russia for years, and whether that is simply that he admires, bully dictators, whether they are Russian or Chinese, I don't know, but there is. You're right. You've never seen as many Russians flitting around a presidential campaign as there were flitting around Trump's.
We grew up. You're younger than me, but I'm going to tell you something. I grew up in the Cold War from 1947 on, and we saw NATO protecting us against Russia and the Warsaw Pact, and we understood the Russians were the bad guys. They went into Hungary and they did everything against Poland and Hungary. Yeah. They were the bad guys. And they had their own weird interests of Russia. Trump doesn't seem to have that. He doesn't have that instinctive understanding that the bad guys, in this case, after Yeltsin, is this guy. Why doesn't he seem to understand that this guy has no goodwill for our country?
Well, clearly Putin has no goodwill. He hates our country. He hates everything that the West represents in terms of democracy. And I don't know, other than the fact that Trump seems to have a real affinity for other bullies. And it was one of the most embarrassing times in both of the Trump presidencies was when he appeared with Putin in Helsinki in Finland and basically was obsequious and said he believed Putin more than he believed his own intelligence community about what was going to happen in Ukraine.
So he likes guy riding around on a horse with his shirt off. I mean, really? It comes down to that weird kind of bully, I love the other bullies kind of guy.
Sure, it all seems that way to me. There's no other logical explanation.
Okay, let me ask you about a tricky subject because I don't like the way the Washington Post has been writing about it. I don't think it has anything to do with anti-Semitism. That's a separate reality in our country, which is awful, but it's different. When I try to understand why Democrats, including all kinds of people, Jewish, not Jewish, whatever, leaders are saying, Bibi got us into this thing. Bibi Netanyahu faced a regional threat from Persia, from Iran. That's true. We do not face a regional threat. I don't care what anybody says. We were not threatened in North America, and Europe wasn't threatened in NATO, but they have we're an ally of Israel. We are not their protector. Why are we in this war? What do you understand through intel and other sources? How did we get into this war? How did Bibi or Ron Dermer or whoever I was sitting in that room, how did they talk us into it?
That's a great question. And again, if you have a war of choice, even if you were going to go to war, wouldn't you have done more preparation? And, again, Marco Rubio basically explained, because he said the Israeli, this was all in the public domain, that the
That's
Israelis
what he said, yeah.
were
Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State,
said
said,
go ahead and decide to hit at the same time because they'd hit us. But again, I agree with you, and I've been a firm supporter of Israel, but they are our ally. They are not, we have an alliance. Israel has a right to defend itself, but we should be dictating our own foreign policy.
Because I think foreign entanglements is one of the first lessons we got from George Washington, which is don't get involved in wars because your friends are involved in wars. And I think the regional concern of Israel about being bombed in Tel Aviv is real, but they've got to deal with that problem somehow. I don't know how they have to deal with it, but the United States doesn't fight a nuclear war with Iran right now. And I just think, wait a minute, a foreign entanglement, Israel, we get entangled into their war. Bibi Netanyahu's war, by the way, Bibi Netanyahu's war. And I just wonder, how's this history going to be written? You're talking about the history of 16. How's this history going to be written about the meeting, the 3-hour meeting the New York Times claims, reports. It was a meeting between the two of them. No Sturmer, no British leader, no French leader, no Canadian leader, no NATO leader. Those two guys got us into this war.
You made the comment. Yeah, listen, it's the war of choice. And at the end of the day, when Americans pay at the gas pump, when their food costs go up, when we see our reputation, and God forbid, we see more casualties, there's no question about who started this.
Okay, let me ask you, what happens when one of our pilots gets grabbed and they don't let him go? They use him as a hostage.
You should expect that.
Yeah, that's what I think. Because that's what happens in war. Mistakes happen, friendly fire happens, you get guys shot down. Heroes are shot down and grabbed as prisoners and used as hostages. Anyway, I want to leave you with that thought because I think it's a terrible thought.
You got to have me back sometime so we can actually have a good conversation about election security too. That's another one that's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We'll come back.
I read your column. I read your column.
And teed up to go next. So that's.
I loved your column. I had so many I got caught up in this war. I'm sorry. I think the war is the topic right now, but I would have you on before. I do worry about Trump and how he can screw up this election and make it so hard to read that he gaslights the Republicans into thinking we really won. You lost, buddies. This is not your year. Anyway, thank you, Senator, so much for coming on.
Chris.
Thank you. And Applebaum, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning. We had Richie Neal, the chairman, ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, and we just had Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who's a ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. I guess I'm worried about what's happening right now, just as of today, the president endorsing Orban. And let's just start with the horror going on in Hungary. It looks like Orban will lose the election if it's a clean election. What do you think is up with our president, J.D. Vance, and Viktor Orban? I think. And something's not working right now with our technology. That's Ann Applebaum. I'm hoping to have one from the Atlantic. We have so much going on right now.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now, and thank you so much for your patience in coming on. There is so much in the news right now. In today's news, the president coming up this morning talking about the end of civilization in Iran because he's going to bomb them back to the Stone Age, as he said before. Awful language about religion in this fight. That's the last thing we should be talking about in the world is differences of religion. And now today, getting on Hungarian television or whatever, giving a big speech, interrupting J.D. Vance as they're both endorsing Viktor Orban, the best friend of Vladimir Putin. Take their time. What is going on?
So for those who don't know, Viktor Orban is, although the leader of a very small country, less than 10 million people in Central Europe, is a kind of model for the MAGA movement in the United States. He's somebody who was democratically elected and then over a number of years used his originally democratic power to take over the Hungarian state. So to make his party essentially the only party that in competition. He took over Hungarian bureaucracy, the Hungarian judiciary, with the help of some oligarchs around him. He took over 95% of the Hungarian media. There's really all the broadcasters, all the newspapers, with only some tiny exceptions, a few websites. And he held power for a long time doing that, and also by creating a narrative about how he was defending Hungary against hordes of migrants, even though there were no migrants who, in fact, wanted to come to Hungary or almost none. And he maintained this language that the MAGA movement admires about keeping Hungary a white Christian country, even as he was occupying, as I say, all of the state and making it almost impossible for anybody else to win election. By doing so, he's made his country the most corrupt in Europe, easily by any standard. very stagnant economy, one of the poorest countries in Europe, which is not where most people thought Hungary would end up, and of course the least free country in Europe, in the European Union. And so, but this is now a model for so many leaders on the European far right, because they admire the way he made his country into a one-party state. And I have to assume that's what J.D. Vance is doing there. He's endorsing somebody who was a model for what the MAGA movement wants to do in the United States. And I should say one other thing about Orban that's very important is that he has, in recent years, as his economy began to fail, he tied his fortunes very closely both to Russia and to China. But there's the Russian kind of cheap gas subsidies and maybe other forms of subsidies for his country and also for his political party have been very important to him staying in power. And he's also become the source of the most important kind of Russian influence campaign in Europe. He uses Russian language. He uses Russian narratives. He's been the one country in the European Union that has blocked European transfers of money to Ukraine and blocked the ability to put sanctions on Russia. So by supporting him, Vance and Trump are aligning themselves essentially with Russia against Ukraine and against Europe.
In 1980, it must have been back in 89, when all the changes occurred, the Hungarians opened up the Iron Curtain. Everything was going on unbelievable. And I met with a guy from Karl Marx University over there in Budapest, Gizi Yasansky, who was a wonderful champion of freedom, I thought, with the forum movement there. They didn't want to call it a political party because that would have offended the communists over there, but it was all about change. And I interviewed a lot of people in Hungary about the change. They said the road to Damascus is very crowded these days, which is a funny line, but everybody was turning against communism. I met with the communist leader of Budapest. I saw all the change leading towards freedom. They were, Yasansky told me, my hero is Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin. It was all hopeful and wonderful. And what happened? How did this lead to Viktor Orban?
I actually think what happened in Hungary could happen anywhere. I mean, it could happen in the United States. It could happen in Western Europe. It's not specifically about the fact that Hungary is a former communist state. What you had was a very determined leader who had a malign intent, who took over democratic institutions one by one. It's not that different from what Modi did in India or what Erdogan did in Turkey, or, as I said, what Trump and Vance have tried to do in the United States. Or I should also say what Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela. This is a known method of malign leaders who seek to curb or change or change their own democracies to make it more difficult for other countries, other parties to win. And it's something that can happen anywhere. In Hungary, it was made possible by particular circumstances. There was a particularly corrupt government before Orban came to power. There was year of the financial crisis had an impact as well. I mean, there were other local specific reasons, but this is a technique that we know. I mean, actually, we all tend to think of democracies falling because of, there's a coup d'etat and there's tanks in the street. But actually, most democracies fall because democratically elected politicians change the political system to make it harder and harder for their opponents to win. The fact that in Hungary, you now have a major opposition party, which has organized itself outside of the media. They have no access to media. They don't even have access to billboard space, and have organized themselves to run a grassroots campaign using also social media in order to reach people, and that they're now polling ahead of Orban in some places, way ahead. I mean, I think that's indicative of how tired Hungarians are, millions of Hungarians are, of this one-party state that Orban created.
Who are you betting on?
I don't bet. I mean, I hope for the sake of Europe. I hope for the sake of Hungarians. I hope really for the sake of democracies around the world that Orban loses, and that he does so without the day afterwards trying to carry out some kind of coup or trying to upset the electoral result. I mean, that's what people, when I was in Budapest 3 weeks ago, this is what people were most afraid of, was either some kind of incident before the election. And actually, we've already seen Orban try to engineer something like that, or immediately afterwards that would somehow suspend the election or keep him in power. So I'm hoping for the sake of Hungary, which a country I love and I've spent a lot of time in. I wrote a book that was partly about Hungarian history, about communist history in Hungary, and I do hope that for the sake of their future that Orban loses.
What's the name of the book, Anne?
The book was called Iron Curtain, and it's a book about the Sovietization of Eastern Europe after the war. I then wrote actually another book called Twilight of Democracy, which was about exactly what we've been talking about the assault that democratically elected leaders make on their own system. That was also partly about Hungary, too.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. And I want to give you a context of, I look at Trump like we all do in the States here. I didn't have an animus towards him when he was just a developer, some rich guy who liked to go on television. A guy who was on The Apprentice and all, and people watched him without any political intent. And his first term began sort of like that, and then it got worse, and then the people reelected him. And I wonder about what's his role model? How does he want to go down in history? And I think, and I don't want to be silly about it, I think it's Mussolini. He seems to want to have structures in his name, buildings like the extension of the White House, the big ballroom on the East Front, this owning the names of airports down in Palm Beach, the having his name ahead of Kennedy on the Kennedy Center. A lot of that's Mussolini stuff. It's ridiculous. It's just ego building, and it's childish, but it's dangerous because it portends the worst. What do you think Orban and Trump want to be? Because they're not Mobutu Sese Seko in the Congo. They don't have a history of tribal warfare and who wins the election wins everything. They're Europeans. Where do they get the idea that it's somehow cool to be an everlasting dictator of your country? Why do they want to be this person?
Throughout human history, there have always been people like that. And actually, the people who wrote our Constitution were afraid of exactly that pattern. I mean, there's a famous quote from Alexander Hamilton when he says, I don't remember the exact words, but someday a demagogue will come along and try to change the system. And this is why we need checks and balances to protect against it. The people who wrote the Constitution, our founding fathers, were also reading, many of them knew very well the history of the Roman Republic, which was also a republic in its time, which fell following the rise of Julius Caesar. So people understood that pattern. It's as old as humanity. That you create a balanced system, you create a way of sharing power, and someone with an ego, someone who believes they can do it better, someone who wants, as you say, big buildings with his name on them, comes in and tries to topple it. And it's happened repeatedly throughout history. We in America are just lucky that we haven't had that happen before now. But it's familiar. We know it from history. We've seen it happen in other countries, and we should be prepared to push back against it when we see it at home.
Well, Peggy Noonan writes for the Wall Street Journal every Saturday. It's one reason why I get up early Saturday to read her column. And she said just what you said. She said, it's not that democracy is under threat right now. It's our republic. It's our form of government that the founding fathers created. The balance of power among the three branches of government, including, maybe the most importantly, the Supreme Court. The balance is off the power of the president. The Congress, which has, at least in the Constitution, was the power to make war. I wonder how you can be loyal to the country and not be loyal to the republic. I don't understand it. I mean, people in my family, my relatives, it's unbelievable. They let Trump get away with hell because they're not loyal to the republic. They're loyal to Trump. It is horrible.
No, this is what you write about in your book. Our system, any system where you have changing, where power changes hands smoothly as it should do in the United States, requires that you have a set of rules and that people abide by the rules and that you have a few neutral institutions that stay in place no matter who's in power. in our case, including the judges, including the bureaucracy and other parts of the system. I mean, to me, the thing that's really fallen through, and it's stunning, and I think this is how history will remember this era, is Congress. The fact that this Republican Congress will not play its congressional role. It's up to Congress to decide whether we go to war. It's up to Congress to decide what the president can and can't spend. These are congressional decisions that this Congress has allowed to let go. I mean, it's as if Congress didn't exist, as if it wasn't functioning the way it was supposed to. And I blame them. And people focus a lot on judges. But actually, Congress has the power to immediately do things. Things take some time to get through the judiciary. And actually, we've had some very good federal judges playing a great role in the last year. But Congress has utterly failed. And so I blame the Republican leaders of this Congress for refusing to play their constitutional role.
Well, the Supreme Court has made taken a position recently that bucks up what was traditional the case, which presidents don't set tariff policy. The U.S. Congress does. I was there working for the Speaker of the House and all that kind. I always knew that you had to fast track legislation to allow even to bring up a tariff question. The Supreme Court has ruled that the Congress has the right to set tariff policy. Trump seems to have lost that one. It looks like the Supreme Court is on the verge right now of certifying birthright citizenship. You don't have to like birthright citizenship. You just got to look and see it. It's in the Constitution. And some people are abusing it, no doubt. But it's there. And unless somebody wants to get rid of it,
address the abuses. Yeah, address the abuses and not the Constitution.
But it's there. And I think the fact that the president is limited to 2 terms, whether he lies about the 3rd term, he was elected twice. He cannot run again. Do you have confidence that the Supreme Court will rule, perhaps in a pre-review of reality, that the president cannot run again? Because he keeps talking about it.
First of all, I don't know that Trump will be healthy enough in 3 years, so I'm not sure this.
I agree with that. I agree with that, Ann. That's not a political statement. That's an observation. It's clear. Right. If you watch television once in a while, you see what condition he's in. With that long tie of his, it doesn't cover up your stomach, Mr. President. That tie is a joke. It goes down to your pants level. It's a joke. But why you dress like that, why you look like that, is your own problem, not ours.
Right, but I have more confidence in the court because there are some members of the court who understand their role is to enforce the Constitution, including some of the conservative members.
What do you think of Amy Coney Barrett?
I'm just much more disturbed by the failure of Republicans in the House and the Senate, because they are the ones who aren't doing their jobs, whereas at least some of the court is doing their jobs.
Why is Brett Kavanaugh so awful on the issue of tariffs? Why is he voting with the bad guys?
I don't have any insight into Brett Kavanaugh's thinking. I don't know.
Because he wants to be chief justice.
Maybe that I don't know. Yeah,
you got to figure out their self-interest in someone who would say the president has the right to control tariffs when he doesn't. That's not a legal decision. I'm sorry, that's not a legal decision. That's something that comes from his self-interest, I think.
No, but Judge Gorsuch, who was also appointed by Trump, made an excellent statement, about pointing that the tariffs are something that belong to Congress. So, we'll see.
Who are you going to trust? Who are you going to love? And I really like having you on the show. You're an authority. I watched you on Meet the Press. Were you on Meet the Press or Face the Nation yesterday?
I didn't think I was on either. So
you were on somewhere. I watched.
Yeah.
Where?
I don't know.
Morning Joe is my
Morning Joe. Right. Morning Joe.
You're so good. It is so good to have you. You're so clear in your thinking and brilliantly rigid about what they are. You don't let me change your opinions. I love it that you're a great writer for The Atlantic, a great magazine for writers, for people that can write. I've always noticed that. When I was in the Peace Corps, I would read The Atlantic to remind me of English. Thank you so much. It's
Thanks
great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on today. And thank everybody for being on. This has been an amazing week. It's an amazing day. A president of the United States who talks about our enemies in this awful language, which is not Lincoln-esque, let's put it that way, and it disparages religion. We've got a lot of problems in the world. Well, one problem is not that we have different religions. That's not one of the problems of the world. It's not. that other countries have different religions, Protestantism, Catholicism, Judaism. It's not a problem. It's not a problem that some people are Muslim. It's not a problem. It's only a problem if you want to make it one. Anyway, thank you all. I don't know if we get through this. I'm not going to say it. I worry about our reserve currency. I worry about our dollar. I worry about the craziness of spending $200 billion and pounding on the Fed every day to try to get them lower interest rates in the face of amazing borrowing. You know, the Democrats used to be rightfully blamed for spending too much money. Watch the Republicans right now. Keep your eye on them and spending. Anyway, thanks for everybody. This week is profoundly frightening. Thank you.